Cinema maintains itself as an important aspect of our popular culture, and it seems that each year we see more and more genres being developed. From horror to romance, it seems like there's something for everyone. But is there really something for everyone? It's no secret that Hollywood creates films that are made for the audience, but who is that audience that they are continually producing films for? In all honesty, most films are produced with the straight white male gaze in mind, because that is the dominant voice in our society, the ruling class, if you will. Now, I know what you're thinking. The vast majority of moviegoers do not fit into that very narrow viewpoint. What about those who aren't part of the hegemony? Lesbians, gays, trans individuals? Thus, the necessity for a viewpoint more interesting than hot lady, strong man, action, explosions, violence, and sex bore the creation of queer cinema. Now, you may be wondering, well, what exactly is queer cinema? And some of you may think it's as simple as taking any storyline and changing the main character from straight frat bro to gay frat bro. But it's far more complex than that, and the comprehensive understanding of what queer cinema is a bit more fluid than you may think and can vary based on who you ask. Traditionally, the broadest definition of queer cinema has been films that, as Maria Flood puts it, include markers such as films made by queer filmmakers featuring queer actors, themes, and characters, reception and practices, a gay or camp aesthetic, and the re-examination of old classics to look for repressed or hidden LGBT elements. It's a rather broad definition, and one that mainstream Hollywood has tried to turn into its next cash cow. Of course, these attempted copies at true queer cinema tend to fall short, and rather than queer cinema, we get LGBT cinema or gay cinema, a genre of so-called queer film that is seen as existing outside of the realm of true queer cinema. It's a version of the concept that has become muddled by the hegemon and features films typically consisting of, as one author puts it, conventional melodramas focused on white, middle-class gay men. These films take heteronormative concepts and storylines of gender and sexuality and simply replace the heterosexual lead with a homosexual one. Another route these films also often take is a victimizing narrative of the homosexual lead, making the entire subject of the film the character's sexuality, and in doing so, creating the false narrative that once the character is out, everything is sunshine and rainbows and happy endings. They take no account of other factors, such as race and class, that could impact a character's life and storyline. They create false narratives that support age stereotypes and proliferate negative views of and within the LGBTQ community. Through Hollywood's perversion of queer cinema, we see the necessary birth of new queer cinema. One author defines it as an outlet for expression and subversion of heteronormative understandings of gender and sexuality. And Gary Needham states that films of the genre unsettle conventions, common sense assumptions, and concepts of what is normal and normative. New queer cinema is the opposition to the mainstream and to films that try to mainstream queer film. This genre is seen as being radical filmmaking. Films of this genre directly oppose what is defined as being normal and popular. These films are often made independently, and they aren't made for a popular audience. They aren't created to be blockbusters. They're made by filmmakers who are seeking to tell a story, often one that hasn't been shared before. Films such as The Watermelon Woman and Rurangi fall into this genre, and feature storylines that aren't focused on the character's gender or sexuality. Rather, their identity is just a portion of the story, and there are other issues brought to the forefront as the focus of the film. The focus of The Watermelon Woman was Cheryl's search for the fictional Faye Richards in order to bring light to the role of Black women in filmmaking throughout history, rather than Cheryl's relationship issues. The focus of Rurangi was Kaz's return to his hometown and the issues between he and his father over his absence during his mother's illness and proposing her bill for better farming practices, rather than focusing on Kaz facing issues with others accepting his new identity. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, these seem like rather broad genre definitions. Aren't there more specific subgenres in queer film just as there are in popular hetero film? And you'd be correct. These are incredibly broad genres. I consider them to be umbrella genres in which we can find a wide variety of subgenres. Now, in all honesty, in researching for this video today, I've come to find that there is no fully comprehensive list of queer film genres the way we'd think of a typical list of film genres. If you were to simply Google basic film genres right now, you'd likely find a basic list including genres such as action, romance, comedy, sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and thriller. But I'm sure you're aware that even within those genres, there are countless subgenres to be found. It's a rather similar situation for queer film subgenres, but it's a much more difficult process to find them all. As I stated previously, Googling queer film genres does not yield the same simplified, comprehensive results. Luckily for you, I've done a bit of digging and can provide a couple of examples of queer film subgenres. Now, something to note about these subgenres is that they often are created as queer cultivations of some already existing genres. There are sometimes entirely new genres that are created, but often queer filmmakers subvert already existing genres or concepts. One prime example of the creation of a queer subgenre through the subversion of an existing genre is Park Chan-wook's 2016 film, The Handmaiden. Park's film does a fantastic job of bringing the neo-Victorian genre out of the Anglophone and away from heteronormativity. The film takes the traditionally Anglo-based heteronormative genre and places it within Korea, featuring not one but two lesbian lead characters. The film pulls from Korean history for its context and features the lead character's lesbianism as part of the plot line and driving force for the character's actions without allowing it to completely overtake the film. And thus we see the birth of queer neo-Victorianism. Now, as I mentioned above, while many queer subgenres are subversions of existing genres, we occasionally see the creation of entirely new subgenres. Cheryl Dunye's 1996 film, The Watermelon Woman, is a prime example of this particular occurrence. Something to note about Cheryl Dunye's documentary-esque film is that it's entirely fiction. She created not only a new genre, which is Black lesbian film, but also created a history that she wanted to see. Thus, for this film, Cheryl is credited for not only the creation of Black lesbian film, but also the creation of queer documentary parodies. And with that, we conclude our review of queer cinema as a genre, and some of the subgenres found within it. Queer cinema is just like mainstream cinema in that it is always growing. There are always new concepts and ideas coming forth, new genres being created, and old ones being revisited and subversed into newer, more complex versions.